Hello, everybody. Bob Oxley here. It's time for tips, topics, issues, and positions. And today our topic is going to be on the new U.S., let me see if I get this straight now, USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, which is has reached tentative agreement. And here we are again. I'm very fortunate to have coaxed Professor Joe Green to return to our studio to discuss this new agreement that is replacing NAFTA. And welcome, Professor Green.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be back.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And boy, this is interesting in that just last Sunday, Canada came to an agreement with the U.S. on this portion of this new USMCA. Mexico had agreed to it previous to that, but and I really would love to have you, as we progress through the show, just talk about how this particular agreement differs from NAFTA and who's going to benefit and who's not. And so we're kind of like going to open it up on and just talk that way. How's that sound to you?
Sounds good to me, Bob.
All right, let's do that then. So we always start off with the basics. And so the new acronym, the USMCA, is it just another trade agreement? Is it does it duplicate NAFTA? Can you just give us some preliminary, and then we'll get into a little bit more details, who it affects and who it doesn't affect, and things of that sort.
It doesn't duplicate NAFTA exactly, although there are some parts of it that didn't change from the agreement that was negotiated back in the 90s. The main focus seems to have been on automobiles. The old NAFTA agreement had had a rule that said 65%, I think it was 65%, of a car that was sold in North America had to be assembled or designed or all of the stuff that goes into a car.
Okay.
In the region of the North American of the NAFTA agreement. That's been raised now to 75%. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
There was some sort of a limit on wages that could be paid to the car companies had to pay their workers, and that's been raised. I don't know I can't remember what it was before. It's now $16.
$16 US dollars.
45% of the labor working on a car in Mexico, the United States, and Canada has to be paid $16 or more.
Equivalent to their own currencies, right? Is that?
Well, there's some stuff in there about manipulating currencies. Maybe we can talk about that. That gets really complicated.
Okay.
With my students, I usually need a blackboard, but I can try if you want to deal with it.
We may address that. That's interesting. So are you saying that the majority of this new I have to say it again, getting used to it, USMCA is focused primarily on the automotive industry?
There's evidently some stuff about dairy. The Canadians have had really high tariffs on us sending our dairy stuff north, and that was reduced. But the reports I'm seeing, I have not read the agreement. The reports I'm seeing say that the reduction was minimal, more almost symbolic, okay?
Wow.
But there will be some more access for American goods into Canada based on the agreement. The other big sticking point was how you solve disagreements. And NAFTA had a very strict and very complicated set of rules by which if somebody thought that another nation was violating the NAFTA agreement, they go through a set of negotiations, and there was this rule and that rule. Those have been simplified, but the Trump administration wanted to get rid of them because the president's position was we needed to be totally in charge of our economy and do whatever we wanted. And the Canadians wouldn't go along with that. That was why Canada was late getting to this, because they've got a number of things that they want to protect. But there is still some way to negotiate, or some kind of a body or set of bodies that will adjudicate disagreements, but it's not as hard to do it as it once was.
Okay, so there are some good points to this new agreement. My understanding is Canada, Parliament, Canada, Justin Trudeau met with his Parliament last Sunday, which was September 30th, and they came to an agreement. They said they liked it. They said, let's move forward on it. Yeah. And the U.S. and Mexico had already achieved a tentative agreement that left Canada out because of the tariff situation that was being imposed between the U.S. and Canada. So there were some trouble areas that had to be resolved. And I guess I'm making the assumption that Mexico had already reached an agreement, and now, as of last Sunday evening, Canada has said, look, we can go move forward on this with this new USMCA. And correct me if I'm wrong, I heard that they're going to consummate this officially in November. I
think, yeah, they all get together and sign it at I think they're going to have a meeting of, it might be the G7, but Mexico doesn't normally come to the G7, so I may be wrong, but one of those international meetings, and then they, as a side thing, they would sign it at that. Then it has to be submitted to the parliaments in Mexico and Canada, and it has to be submitted to the U.S. Congress.
Got it. Okay, so that's subsequent to November, right?
That comes after the leaders of the countries sign it.
Sign it with a tentative agreement, with the understanding that it has to be confirmed by their respective
right. And we have a rule in the United States that about trade agreements that the Congress passed back in the 80s that the Congress doesn't get to modify, and it can't amend it. They have to vote up or down. So that'll be
interesting.
Yeah,
that'll be interesting. Somebody told me, and I read this just brief because everybody's grabbing information about this. They said that this new agreement has some of the parts from NAFTA, but they said the other one to take a look at, and I'm going to throw this at you. They said the start of the verbiage from the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's in existence.
Yeah, I saw
of which China is not part of that.
Right.
But it would be.
Well, technically, nobody's part of it because it hasn't been negotiated. Well, the people who were in TPP, besides the United States, the president pulled us out of it right after he was elected, have finished negotiating it, so there is a TPP. My understanding is the intellectual property part of TPP was included in this agreement almost word for word, and Mexico and Canada generally don't steal our intellectual property, but the idea is other negotiations go forward, this will be a model, and so this language would then become the language that we could insist that goes in for other countries that we have a little more problem with, especially if we ever get to a position where we negotiate with China, although the president and the vice president's actions in the last few days make that seem less likely, but who knows? Maybe we'll be exchanging letters and be in love in the next couple of weeks.
Taking the North Korea model, right?
Yeah.
All right, good point. Here's what I've got. I'm just going to bounce these off. I've got, as far as the vehicle, the auto workers themselves, and this is just some notes that I've picked up, that starting in 2020, 30% of the vehicle production, and you mentioned this earlier, had to be 30% of the content, and that 3 times the average for the Mexican worker rises to 40% in 2023. And we're talking about wages. My question to you is how can we put together an agreement that dictates wages for certain segments like the automotive industry? Is that normal for agreements?
Well, the United States since 1938 has had a national minimum wage in which we've dictated a wage that every employer has to pay. So governments can do that. You have to remember when you're talking to me, I'm a free trader, a free market guy. And I think all of this is central planning. It's a government official, in this case, Jared Kushner and Robert Lighthizer, the main American negotiators, asserting that they know what the correct wage is that a business should be paying its employees. Now, from my perspective, that's a decision that ought to be negotiated between an employer and an employee based on the employee's skills and experience and on the needs of the employer, okay? Some of your listeners may not agree with me on that, but I view any attempt to interfere with normal market processes absent some sort of what economists call an externality as a form of central planning of the central government choosing winners and losers. That's what they're doing here. And that invariably makes consumers worse off. And my standard, every time I think about any kind of issue that the government's dealing with, is what is going to make the consumers better off. And that's usually what the consumers are able to freely choose for themselves among the various competing products and so on that they get. So if my choice now is a car made in North America versus a car that was made in Japan or Germany or South Korea, and the car made in Germany or South Korea or Japan is equal to the quality of the car I want to buy, but a lower price, because of the tariffs it will now face, I don't get to make that choice. Therefore, I'm not as well off at the margin as I would have been. The net result of that is I'm not going to have as much money as I would have had because I've spent more on the car now, and that's gone into a North American car rather than a Japanese car. And therefore, I don't. My budget doesn't extend as far as it would have had I been able to buy the cheaper car, and I won't be buying various kinds of other products, and that is the normal way that people are able to afford innovative stuff, new iPhones or whatever it is that comes along that makes the economy dynamic and innovative. So I view this as a step back from the free market innovation machine that we've had in the United States that's made us wealthy and cured our diseases and allowed us to work in air-conditioned offices rather than out in fields and all of the other good things that come from being relatively wealthy. So I'm always suspicious of trade agreements where there are lots of rules and regulations that have to be complied with in order to get a material across the border.
I think what stood out with me, Professor Green, was that they emphasized it on the automotive workers. Like you said at the beginning, you indicated they were really focused in on the automotive industry and the dairy, but the automotive industry specifically. And it just seems like there's a content regulation for North America that affects the three countries positively, supposedly, because it's maintaining, you've got to have so much content, so they're going to have the manufacturing in country.
Yeah. Imagine how hard it is for a automaker in competition to arrange to get a car that they can sell to a consumer. It's literally got tens of thousands of different kinds of parts. Some of the parts, are one-off. Only because of the way our engineers designed this, we got this chip or this bulb or this fuse or this part that is one-off, and the people who make it the best are in Germany, or maybe the people who make it best are in Japan. Now we're telling the car companies that you have to look around and you have to have certain mix, so that instead of going out and finding the best part that even if it's made in Germany, that I have to now get 75% of all the parts have to be made in Mexico or Canada or Japan, which means that I am
or the
leaving.
United States.
Yeah, the United States,
Yeah.
which means I'm leaving out the possibility of finding all of these really innovative, smart engineers or suppliers or whoever it is that happen not to live in North America, and the net result is the price of the car is going to rise. Now, General Motors loves this, even though it's going to take them a lot of time and effort and we're going to have to find a new engineering firm that can make the part that we can't get now because of this. These supply chains are extremely complicated and complex. But General Motors now will get to sell its car at a higher price. So its profits have gone up. And you can bet that both the Auto Workers Union, I know the auto worker, I've heard the AFL-CIO chairman, Mr. Trumka, celebrate this, okay? The auto workers and the automobile companies are getting a windfall out of this. Their profits are going up. The auto workers are going to get higher wages and so on. Now, I didn't get higher wages out of this. In fact, it's going to cost me money.
Yes.
Most of the listeners we're talking to didn't get higher wages out of this, and we're talking about people who make sometimes, $50 or $60 an hour. We're not making that in St. George. Okay, we just gave those people a raise. We just made General Motors richer after we bailed them out in 2008. Now we're going to make them richer, and artificially, and we're all going to pay for it.
So even though some of the releases coming from the automotive industry are saying we're just going to appreciate a moderate increase in cost of vehicles.
Right.
So what does that word
multiply
mean?
that all overall. The only estimate I've seen is at least $1,000 a car. These are all estimates, and we have no, we'll see what happens when it happens because nobody knows how they're in some instances how they're going to build the car now, because the supply chain that they had the contracts with, now they're going to have to renegotiate, and they're not going to be able to use some of the contractors because they're outside the boundaries of this North American area that they could have used before.
Okay. Now, somebody said that this agreement, this new agreement that's pending, has a 16-year window.
Yeah.
And then, but there's every 6 years they're going to reevaluate all aspects of the agreement. So, as a result of that, I'm thinking automotive. There's a big push for electric cars and driverless cars and moving forward for the good of the environment and all a number of other justifications.
Again, that's all central planning stuff. The cars don't make any money.
So, my next question to you was: so, are we going to see the automotive, the U.S. automotives, and like Ford of Canada? Are we going to see the automotive industry pull back on their R&D for electric cars and driverless cars? And even though the rest of the world may be continuing to do the research and design for this, because there's no pressure on them to do it?
I don't know what Mexico and Canada do. We have certain regulations that the Congress has imposed on the automakers and that through the Department of Transportation, that they have to make a certain number, a certain portion of the fleet that they sell have to be renewable friendly, that is electric or hybrid, whichever, however they do it. The American car companies are basically charging higher prices on their gasoline cars in order to pay for the electric cars because massive number of Americans don't want them. They won't buy them. Again, this is not consumer friendly in the sense that I described before. So that doesn't change. The United States still has that renewable requirement on our automobiles.
All right.
Although I understood the Trump administration is looking closely at that requirement. So I don't know what will happen with that.
That's really
But that I don't understand. I don't think is part of this.
okay. But that could be an offshoot that could develop 6 years from now of the 16 years. You'd have to take a look at it.
Yeah, if this is hypothetical, if let's say a different makeup of the Congress occurred that looked more like California, so that they wanted to, like the California legislature, so that the requirements were that we push this. When we looked at this agreement again, the United States would probably really push to have Mexico and Canada have the same mix we do. But again, Canada may already have it. I just don't know.
That's something to take a look at. Getting back, the other sector that we looked at was on the dairy farmers. Okay, this effect on the dairy farmers, and just some preliminary. What's concerning to me is the report, the Rural Farmers Report came out last month and indicated that 47 dairy farmers in Wisconsin declared bankruptcy. Is this going to help them? Are they going to say, maybe I'm not going to go bankrupt now because now Canada's opened up to us? Or is it more beneficial to Canada, or is it beneficial to the U.S.? Or?
Okay. Now, my answer has to be I don't know.
Okay.
All right. So I'm a college professor, so I'll just launch in and say what I think.
That's why you're here. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. Even though I have no clue whether I'm right or not about it. There are always businesses going bankrupt, and because they're not well run. There are businesses that thrive because new markets are created, all of that kind of thing. So, some dairy farmers going out of business at any one time, where in another part of the state, new ones coming in, we would want to know what the net is on all that, which I don't know. Canada has had really high tariffs. I understand over 200% on American farmers selling their dairy products into Canada. And part of the purpose for this agreement was to get Canada to reduce that. My understanding is that they didn't reduce it very much, that it's really moderate, the change that's been made. But it might help one or two of those farmers that were in trouble. My guess is, based on the national news that's been going, is that a better explanation for that was the general increase in tariffs that the administration has imposed on other nations and the reciprocal tariffs that they've been reimposing on us. For example, in this new agreement, the tariffs we put on Canadian steel and aluminum have not been reduced or taken off.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Lighthizer says that has to be done in a different negotiation. So the Canadians, of course, wanted those taken off. But I think the Chinese aren't buying as much of our soybeans and so on. I don't know if there was some dairy stuff in there. I would assume there was, because Wisconsin voted for President Trump, and the Chinese targeted, with their response to our tariffs, those states that could change the balance in the 2020 election. So they're trying to influence the 2020 election. One of the reasons maybe that the vice president was so adamant against China that he didn't mention, but it could be a reason. So my own sense is I would look to those initial tariffs that we started last summer rather than this agreement.
Yeah. I'm just looking at a couple notes that I've got here on the tariffs. It said, this is one of the statements that came out with this agreement. It said, no U.S. tariffs unless Canada, Mexico exports exceeds 2.6 million per year. And what it's saying is if Canada exports to the U.S. 32.4 billion parts, or if Mexico exports in excess of 108 billion parts, this is automotive, then the tariffs will be put back into place.
Yeah.
So is this agreement so flexible that we could actually go sector by sector and impose, say, you got to be good little neighbors under this agreement, and if you exceed this, these tariffs are going to go into effect. Is that what this agreement's all about?
Yeah.
Wow.
What Lighthizer is after is he claims is creating American jobs. Okay. I think there's absolutely no evidence that that's going to happen. But the argument would be, if Canada is limited in the number of, bodies and parts and tubes and tires and all of the stuff that they can sell into the United States, and Mexico is limited, we're going to have to get it from somewhere, and so that will stimulate U.S. industry
right,
and we'll bring factory jobs back to the United States.
That's the idea. That's what they're saying.
I'm almost sure that when the economists get after this, they'll find that the unforeseen costs of doing this will far outweigh any new jobs that are created. But again, I'm going to have to wait and see.
I remember when you were here, fortunately here, your last time, you talked about tariffs, explained what tariffs were, and that tax. And you said you gave an explanation as to those that are utilizing some of the resources, but then you had on the other side the companies that couldn't get the resources here, had to actually pay the higher price, which possibly could have put them bankrupt or not being competitive. I think there's a potential of something like that happening even with this new agreement that hasn't officially been signed yet, but this USMCA, compared to the NAFTA, which one in your estimation was better? Should we have left NAFTA in place? Or
this has most of the good economic studies of NAFTA said that it was a net job creator. But now, flushing all of that out and the statistical calculations and so on, or something as complex as this, are really, really difficult. And so, there are hundreds and hundreds of journal articles in economics about the back and forth about all of that. But this involves more planning, more the Robert Lighthizer deciding who's the winner and the loser. And in my view, that is always a negative in terms of U.S. economic growth.
Okay, well, I've just got the high sign. We're going to have to terminate this conversation, but boy, this is interesting. It's not consummated yet. It has to go before each of the legislative bodies of Canada, Mexico, and the United States for approval. Very interesting, but I really appreciate you coming in and at least giving us the preliminary, because it's only been a few days old. We're taking a look at it, and then, like you and I both were looking at information coming in. It's pretty new, so we're just getting leaks of information, but I thought it was important that our listeners be aware of this as to what's moving on. And I'm sure there's a lot of meetings going on in the automotive industry right now, as well as in the dairy and other areas that they've identified under this particular agreement. So, Professor Green, once again, thank you so much for being here. It's been very informative, as usual, and I can't wait to get more details after this is consummated, the final form, to see what we've got and take a look at it again, if you wouldn't mind coming back and giving us your estimation once it's in its final form.
I guess I'll be coming back every week, Bob.
Well, it seems that way.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and I know our listeners do, because I shouldn't say this, but that show, the Tip Show on tariffs, had the highest viewer response of any of the shows we've ever had, so it's an honor to have you again.
Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes another episode of Tips, Topics, Issues, and Positions. This is Bob Oxley wishing you a very nice day. You can look at us on Facebook, on Twitter, on our podcast affiliate, Podbean, as well as YouTube. And also, as we're broadcasting at 3 p.m. on Friday on KDXI 100.3 FM and rebroadcasting on Saturdays at 4:30 p.m. on KDXI Radio 100.3 FM. Until then, we'll see you next week. Bye now.